I'm going to start by presenting a 14-minute video which introduces the free software movement. I found it's much better to show this talk that I gave than to say it live. I got it really sharpened up for that presentation. So here it goes. Free software is the first battle in the liberation of cyberspace. Who controls your computer? Is it you? Or is it some big company that's really controlling it? Well, what is a computer? A computer is a universal machine. It will do any computation you want it to because you give it a program that says what the computation is that you want. So the computer only knows how to get out an instruction and do it, and get out another instruction and do it. The program has the instructions. It says what to do. So by writing the right program, you can make it do anything. Well, almost anything. So who gives the instructions to your computer? You might think it's obeying your instructions when really it's obeying somebody else first, and you, only as much as that company wants it to, will let it listen to you. With software, there are two possibilities. Either the users control the program or the program controls the users. It's inevitably one or the other. So in order for the users to control the program, they need the four essential freedoms. And that's the definition of free software. Free software respects the user's freedom and community. Now, we often call it libre, using the French or Spanish word, pronounce it as you like. The point is, that's what we mean. We don't mean it's gratis. We're not talking about price. We're concerned with your freedom. And we sometimes say free/libre to show that. So freedom 0 is the freedom to run the program as you wish for whatever purpose. Freedom 1 is the freedom to study the source code of the program and change it so it does the computing you want it to do. But what is the source code? Well, every program typically will have two forms. There's the form that you can read and you can understand if you know the programming language. That's the source. That's what programmers write and change. Then there's the executable, which is a bunch of numbers which even a programmer can't figure out. If all you get is the executable, it's a horrible pain in the neck to figure out what it does, and even harder to change it. So to give you the real possibility to study and change it, they've got to give you the source code. That's a requirement. Well, with those two freedoms, each user separately can make a copy and start changing it and make it do what she wants. That's individual control. But what if you're not a programmer? You look at the source code and you don't understand it. Individual control isn't enough. We also need collective control, which means any group of users are free to work together to adapt the program to what they want. Of course, in the group, some of them are programmers. They're the ones who actually write the changes, but they're doing it as part of the group for what the group wants. Of course, the group doesn't have to be everybody. So others can use it some other way. They're all free to do that. So collective control requires two more essential freedoms. Freedom 2 is the freedom to redistribute exact copies, to make the copies and then give them away or sell them when you wish. And freedom 3 is similar, but it's for your modified versions. You're free to make copies and then give them or sell them when you wish. So if you do have these freedoms, then it's free software. The users control the program. But if any of those freedoms is missing, then the users don't control the program. Instead, the program controls the users, and the developer controls the program. So that means this program is an instrument of unjust power for its developer over the users. That means the users don't have freedom. That's non-free proprietary software, which we got to get rid of. Well, when you've got proprietary software, what happens? Sometimes the program snoops on the user. Sometimes it tracks the user. Sometimes it restricts the user and stops users from doing what they want to do. You can see that the blue ray is your enemy. Sometimes the software remotely deletes books, as Amazon did with 1984. Sometimes the developer compels users to install a harmful upgrade by threatening to take away other functionality if it's not installed, as Sony did. And sometimes they can even forcibly change the software at a distance, as Microsoft can with Windows through the universal backdoor. So sometimes they even sabotage users, as Microsoft does when it tells the NSA about bugs in Windows so it can use them to attack people's computers. Well, what you get is basically, with proprietary software, the owner has power over the users and takes advantage of this power, putting in those various malicious functionalities to hurt the users. Of course, they don't do this because they're sadists. They're doing it just for money, for greed. They have various ways that they can profit from having this power over users, which does not make it even the tiniest bit less evil. But they have no shame about it. They have conferences where they talk about the latest ways they can take advantage of users through the power they have. Basically, proprietary software, which is now from almost all the users of proprietary software, they're using proprietary malware. It's software for suckers. So how do you stop being the victim? Formerly, you had to stop using computers, but not anymore. Now you can come join us in the free world that we've built. In 1983, I announced I would develop a completely free software operating system called GNU. In 1992, we had it almost finished, but one piece was missing, the kernel. Linus Torvalds in that year freed his kernel Linux, which filled the last gap and gave us the first complete system you could run on a PC, GNU plus Linux. So, unfortunately, having freedom at one point doesn't guarantee you'll keep it. There are over 1,000 different variants of GNU/Linux. They're called distributions. A few of them are entirely free software. Most of them have non-free software added because they're maintained by people who aren't concerned about freedom. They'd rather add convenience at the cost of freedom. So you have to check which is a free distro. To keep your freedom sometimes requires a sacrifice, sometimes a big sacrifice, as at Lexington. Sometimes, but in our campaign, they tend to be little sacrifices. Anybody with a little bit of maturity can make these sacrifices. For instance, you want applications, but some of them are non-free. If you want freedom, you got to do without them. So there may be some inconveniences you have to suffer for your freedom's sake. Then many websites send non-free programs written in JavaScript to the user's browser. If you don't want to run non-free programs, you should install Libre.js, which keeps out non-free JavaScript. And sometimes servers will offer to do your computing. They say, send us all your data, obviously for suckers. Then the server does the computing and sends you back the results. But you're not supposed to think about what's happening because it's a cloud and you don't see what's going on. Well, you should look. It's service as a software substitute, and it takes away control of your computing. So a large fraction of the world's web servers are running GNU/Linux and other free software. But I think the most important computers to put freedom in are your computers, not companies' web servers. They deserve freedom also. But above all, it's people that deserve freedom. So we need to advance. And to do that, we have to cross obstacles. One of them is there are big companies that make a lot of money by having control over users, and they don't want to let us advance. We have to overcome their opposition. Another is that the mainstream media don't talk about free software. They have a term that they use to bury these ethical issues. They say open source instead. Now, it talks about more or less the same programs, but with different ideas, where free software activists say, this is a matter of right and wrong. Users deserve freedom. We demand freedom. The people who say open source, they don't want to say that. So instead they say, let the users change the software and redistribute it, and they'll make the code better. They'll fix some bugs. It may be true, but it's a less important issue. If we want to keep our freedom, we've got to talk about freedom. So say free software, and you're helping us every time. Another obstacle is that lots of schools teach non-free software, which is basically like teaching the kids to smoke tobacco. It's implanting dependence, which is the opposite of what schools should do. A school should prepare citizens to live in a strong, capable, independent, cooperating, and free society, which means teaching free software in the school. But there's another reason to do that for education. Some kids want to become programmers. They're curious. They want to know how the programs work. Well, the one who's studying a free software can understand it. The one who's studying a non-free program can't learn anything because the knowledge in the non-free program is withheld, denied to the students. So to uphold the spirit of education, the school should make sure its programs are free. But there's an even more important reason. Schools should teach the spirit of goodwill, the habit of helping other people. So the class should say, if you bring a program to class, just as if you bring cookies to class, you've got to share it with everyone else. Can't keep it to yourself. You've got to share the source code so other people can learn. So don't bring any proprietary software to this class. The school has to set a good example by following its own rule. It should bring only free software to class, except as a reverse engineering exercise. Another obstacle is there's hardware we don't know how to write free software for because they won't tell us how to use the hardware. That's shocking. They want to sell you the product and they won't tell you how to use it. They say, here's a non-free program you can use, run it and shut up. Don't bother us. Well, how do we find out how to run that hardware? With reverse engineering, you've got to study all those zeros and ones to figure out what they really do and write down how to use that hardware so someone else can write the free program to do it. It's hard work, but it can be done. If you want to make a big technical contribution, that's what you should do. Each new activity of life can bring with it new human rights that are necessary. And the human rights depend on each other. If you lose one, it becomes harder to maintain the others. So nowadays, computing is so important in society that the freedoms of free software are among the human rights that society must establish and protect. Thus, how to help? Well, you can write free software. You can organize groups to campaign and persuade schools and governments to move to free software. You can help other people when they have trouble using free software or help them install it. You can say free software and spread the philosophical ideas. Moving to free software is the first step in the liberation of cyberspace. But of course, we also use the internet. We need other freedoms there, like network neutrality and putting an end to surveillance of people in general.
So, with that introduction, I'll continue by saying some more about free software and the issues of freedom in computing. Now, I didn't have time in that video to talk about copyleft. Copyleft is not part of the freedom we need to have. Copyleft is a method we use to establish freedom and defend it. Copyleft is a way of releasing free programs. It's not the only way. There are many ways. There are many different free software licenses. When you write a program and you legally apply a free software license and you release it that way, now you've contributed to the world's free software. The license is essential because it's the license that legally gives the 4 freedoms to users who get copies of the program. That's extremely important to do carefully. So look at GNU.org/licenses for advice on how to do this right. Make sure that it isn't sloppy. Well, there are many different free software licenses. The ones that are copyleft protect against converting this free program into a non-free program. There are lots of people who don't have the scruples to try to respect other people's freedom. They want to impose their power in place of freedom. Copyleft licenses make that illegal. They use copyright to do it. All software, all free software and licenses operate under copyright law. And copyleft licenses are no exception. But what they do is something very careful. They add conditions to freedoms 2 and 3. Remember, freedom 2 is the freedom to make exact copies and then give them away or sell them when you wish. And freedom 3 is the same with your modified versions. Well, copyleft licenses say when you are distributing these copies, modified or unmodified, you have to preserve the same license so that the people who get copies from you are free to do the same things that you are free to do. The freedom has to propagate to everybody who gets any version of this program. So I came up with the technique of copyleft in 1985 when I first had a piece of the GNU system that was worth actually releasing to users and encouraging them to download it. I put on a basic first version copyleft license. Then I worked with lawyers to make it more professional and better. And it's now known as the GNU General Public License, or GNU GPL. And now we're on license version 3. Now this was an unusual thing at the time, the idea of writing a software license and making provision to upgrade it. But I had seen how much work I had to do continuing to change the license I was using. Obviously, it was going to need changing. I had better plan to change it again in the future because I would find out about things that had to be improved. It's just like releasing a program. You're going to have to release another version someday. You should prepare for that. So nowadays, we generally release a program saying you can distribute this under the GNU General Public License version 3 or any later version. And that way, if we ever come out with a version 4, people will automatically have the option of using that program under version 4. Now, version 3 was released in 2007, and so far, we don't need a version 4. I have a list of a few changes that would be nice to make if we make another version. But so far, it looks like there's no urgent reason to make another version, and it's a lot of trouble, the transient. So for now, we're just staying with version 3. Perhaps that's what we'll always do. But it's important to pave the way for the license upgrade path if we ever need to do it. So, in the free software world, you'll find the copylefted programs and the non-copylefted programs. If you look in GNU.org/licenses, you'll find all about free software licensing and copyleft. We have the license list, licenselist.html. It'll tell you which licenses are free licenses and which are not. We also have license recommendations.html. If you've written a program or some other kind of work and you want to release it and you want to see what we think is best to do, look there. So you take all these free programs, some copylefted, some not, and then you put them together and you can get a free operating system. For instance, you can get GNU plus Linux distribution. And if you choose a free distribution to install from, then you can be sure you're getting only free software because the people who maintain that distro have checked already. You could also just get programs yourself, and if you verify that each one is free, you'll also get a free system installation. But that's more work. You got to check it if you got to check it yourself. I'd rather let other people do that checking. Then I can do something else instead with the time. And you can find out all about distributions, basically about free distributions. You can find out in gnu.org/distros. This establishes the situation when you're talking about getting programs and installing them on your computer and running them when you want to run them. But if you're going to talk to the internet, there are other problems that appear. For instance, a grave mistake was made around 20 years ago when browsers were designed to be platforms to receive programs over the internet from all and sundry and run them. And they do this silently. Your browser won't even warn you that some website is trying to send a program to the browser and run that program on your computer. But those programs are often non-free, which means that you're doing computation on your computer, which you have no control over. It's being done by a non-free program that you didn't even know was running on your computer. And as is usually the case, if a program is non-free, it can be malware. A lot of these programs snoop on users. They collect data and send it to the website or to some other website. So one site can have a tracking pixel to send personal data to another website. It's a horrible mess. And organizations you would think would respect their visitors have tracking pixels. It's been a series of scandals. And then the programs themselves, we call them JavaScript programs because that's the programming language they're written in. But that's just a little technical detail. The important point is the program is sent by the website to run in your browser on your computer, and it can collect data about you. Well, the most advanced technique that I know of is called browser profiling, where the website sends a series of benchmark programs, basically artificial programs. They run just to see how long it takes. But on each computer, it's going to be a little different. So if the website sends a collection of benchmarks to time the speed of your computer in various different ways, it'll get a collection of results. And on someone else's computer, it'll get a different collection of results. And it will be a little different in each one. And from that set of numeric values that gets sent back to the website, it can recognize you. It can recognize that it's your computer if it's allowed to run them. So ultimately, we're better off if we refuse to run them. Many websites will just refuse to talk to you if you won't run the non-free JavaScript code. Well, then you got to choose. My choice is my freedom is more important. If I can't use a certain website, well, that's life. And ultimately, that's the choice you're going to have to make one of these days when society is oriented towards helping businesses impose their power on people. You're going to come to a place where you can't deal with a business through its website. Not the way they're trying to deal with you, not the disrespectful way. You have to say no. And so I do. Now, browser profiling, I suspect, is done by coalitions of websites, maybe thousands of websites, all using a particular commercial service of profiling. And so if all those sites can recognize you if you come back. Once they've profiled you, any of those sites will recognize it's you. Now, they may not know your name. They may just know that it's a certain person with a certain computer who has been on that site yesterday and on that site last week. And every time this person goes to any of those sites, it knows that's that person again. But if any one of them happens to know that person's name, then they all can find it out. So I consider browser profiling quite unjust. And this brings me to a point about privacy. Laws proposed to protect privacy usually miss the boat. They're usually designed mainly to limit the use of data that has been collected. But that's too late. What they need to do to succeed in defending people's privacy is to stop the collection of the data. Once the data is collected in a database, there are so many ways it can get to be misused that it's very hard to prevent that. How can the data be misused? Well, it can be deliberately misused by the organization that collected the data, which includes allowing some other organization to buy a copy, rent a copy, or whatever of the data, rent its use. But again, it's intentional misuse with the connivance of the organization that collected it. But that's not the only way. For instance, rogue employees can misuse some of that data. Also, bad security in the organization can allow the data to leak and be misused. Or crackers can break the security and get their hands on the data and misuse it. And finally, the state can collect that data and misuse it. So the idea of trying to allow data to be collected and prevent it from being misused is so unlikely to succeed that it's basically asking to lose. It's a weak policy chosen, I suppose, because businesses fight hard against any effective, strong policy of protecting people's privacy. I have seen in Europe and America parking lots that require motorists to enter the car's license plate number in a computer system as part of paying to park. Well, that is a massive surveillance system, and it is unnecessary massive surveillance. We had parking lots in the past where people had to pay to park, and they were not identified. So clearly it can be done. And yet, despite the fact that this surveillance step is not necessary, the European Union's regulations seem to permit it. So what good are they? They're too weak. Regulations that were adequate would prohibit such parking lots. I suspect that when those regulations say the data can be collected if it's necessary, that the word necessary is being interpreted too weakly. Like it's more convenient, it's more efficient to run the parking lot if this data is collected about everyone, massive surveillance is used. Well, that's not what necessary should mean. You could save some money by snooping on everyone, should not qualify as necessary. But until that gets reinterpreted, until those parking lots get eliminated, replaced by other systems that don't surveil, we see that those regulations are not adequate. Now, I don't expect that any governments are making special efforts to surveil me. But I know that they do surveil me because they surveil everyone. That we know thanks to Snowden. And what that taught me is I should be making efforts to block the kinds of surveillance on me that governments basically do to everyone. And I urge everyone to do that. Now, there's some people who, for specific reasons, would be targets for special surveillance and attack. I'm not an expert on what you should do if you're one of them. I don't think I am one of them. But if you have some reason to think so, I hope you get the special advice about it. And one thing that you need, of course, is to be using free software and not using non-free software, because non-free software is generally designed to mistreat users in various ways. We have a catalog of hundreds of instances of non-free programs that snoop on people or mistreat people, trick people, cheat people. There are all sorts of nasty things they can do. It's in GNU.org/malware. The instances are classified according to what kind of mistreatment it is and according to what company or what kind of product is doing it. Cars nowadays are massive surveillance engines, and I recommend people investigate how to disconnect the antennas in the car so that the car can't communicate anything to anyone, and so that it can't use its GPS and can't figure out where you are. This is not a mathematical guarantee, but I suspect that it will put an end to most of the surveillance in practice. But I've found that there is some new kind of radio communication technique meant for small products in the home to communicate constantly with the manufacturer's server, and I think of that as extremely dangerous. If a product, and this is a very common design system for the Internet of Stings. They call it Internet of Things. I call it Internet of Stings because it's you're invited basically to give yourself up to all sorts of mistreatment. You'll find products which might be on the table next to you, but if you want to tell it what to do, you have to connect over the internet to the manufacturer's server, which then talks to the product you bought. You can't tell that product what to do directly. all commands have to go through the manufacturer's server, which means the manufacturer snoops on everything. There's even a sex toy which can receive commands through the internet, and those commands go through the manufacturer's server. So if the manufacturer can figure out who's sending the commands, which very likely it can, and who has the product, then it knows who is using the product together. And a scandal developed when people found that the product, the toy itself, had a thermometer in it. Now, why would they put a thermometer in a sex toy? If you were using a sex toy, you wouldn't want to know the temperature in it. The purpose of the thermometer is so the manufacturer can tell when it is in contact with a human body. I suspect it can also tell something about how it is in contact with a human body. So this is for more thorough surveillance. I wouldn't even dream of getting a sex toy that could talk to anything or anyone other than me pushing a button or me through my computer directly, or any other product. These so-called smart products, for smart, I say read Snoop, and they're designed to mistreat their supposed owners, and I don't want to have any in my house. So computing is being pushed by business interests in a very nasty direction, and free software is at the center of resisting this. So, but in order to resist, we also have to have the strength to say no. Now, in the past, there were two ways to release a program. They could release it as free software so that we'd all get the source code and we could adapt it, add to it, and so on. Or they could release it as proprietary, non-free software where we would only get an executable. And if we wanted to run it, we couldn't change it. It would just do whatever the owner decided it should do and imposed on us. But nowadays, there's a third way to make software available, which is not to release it at all. They just set up a server, they put the program in that, and they say, if you want this program to do computing for you, you can't have a copy. All you can do is make an account on the server, connect to it, send your data, and let the program run in our server, they say, and you'll get the answers. Well, this is even worse in terms of respect for users' autonomy and control than releasing a non-free program. If it's a non-free program, you could at least control how it can talk to anybody else. You could observe what it does. You could try to reverse engineer it. You might succeed. But if the program is hidden away in a server that you can't touch, you have absolutely zero control over what it's going to do, and absolutely zero control over what it's going to do to you and your data. We call this service as a software substitute. And lots of people in business will talk about it as a way of deploying software. They consider this the natural progression from releasing a free program to releasing a non-free program to making available only an online disservice that you could be used by. So we have to be ready to say no. So we've got lots of fights on our hands. But fortunately, there are lots of us, and we can do many things in parallel, trying to resist this, trying to reduce this. Now, with so much conflict around us in computing and elsewhere, I often get people asking me what the outcome is going to be. Who's going to win? Is freedom going to win? Is free software going to win? I've realized that those questions are misguided. I don't need to know. I don't need to even think about who's going to win, because that wouldn't help me. If I knew the answer to that, that means I couldn't change the answer. And I'm more interested in doing my bit to change the answer, to help freedom win, than I am in knowing what's going to happen. I don't need to know what's going to happen. What I need to know is what I should do. What can I do to help freedom win? That's the important question. That's the question we should all ask ourselves. And often that's an easier question. Like, I don't know whether fascism is going to take over the United States. But I know the things I can do to make it less likely. And those are the questions that will help me act now. And likewise, I don't know whether free software is going to win, but I know the kinds of things we can do to help it win more. And once you know that, then you can go to work and do good things and know that they're helping, and you don't have to worry over questions that we can't answer. It's a big relief once you realize you don't need to try to figure out what's going to happen in the future. So, I'd like to suggest that you take a look at gnu.org/help, which lists many kinds of volunteer work and activities that would help the GNU project, help develop free software, help solve some of the problems that we face, and look for things you can do. Look for things you would like to do. And at this point, I think I should ask for questions. Now, have people got pieces of paper to hand out for questions?
We get questions in an online form.
I'm sorry, what? What did you say?
We have questions sent to us online from the audience.
How are they being sent? What software are people being asked to use?
Richard, it was not I didn't choose the software, and
I don't care.
And I don't
care. I want to know what it is, because I'm not going to cooperate if it's non-free software. I'm serious. I am serious.
Do we have paper, guys?
I will not allow the use of non-free software to seep into my own activities and be legitimized by my cooperating with them. Because what would that do? The last recourse I've got is to say, no, this is non-free software worming its way in, and if others won't say no first, it falls to me. So that's why I'm asking, what software are they using?
It's non-free software, Richard. I'm so sorry.
Well, all right. I'm not going to accept the questions that way. It's my duty to say no. Now, I don't mind hearing you say questions with your voice. It's just that I have hearing problems, so it doesn't always work very well. What you need to do if you're going to be asking a question with voice is to speak loud, slowly, and clearly, like this. When people speak loud, slowly, and clearly, I can hear. But if you speak fast, they're going to be very clear. If you do that, I won't know what you said. My problem is recognizing speech sounds in imperfect conditions. So please make the conditions as perfect as you can so that I hear you. And then I'll be happy to answer.
Okay, so thank you very much for an amazing talk. I've heard a quote, I can't remember a source, that hackers started it and hackers are the ones who are going to end it. So,
I have no idea what that's about, and I would hesitate to say that I agree it's likely to be true.
So, like, do you feel that there is an increased movement to push towards free software in the areas you mentioned, for example, the web or the IoT space?
I don't know. I really I don't do the kind of monitoring of hacker activities that would enable me to know the answer. But what I do know is it's not enough, right? It's questions of the form, are we winning? I wouldn't know the answer to. Questions of the form, what should we do? Those I can suggest answers to.
Okay, I have a question about what can we do. So what I see in our world, we are in a capitalistic world, and basically the private company, what they use, to, as you were saying, to use us, is basically they use money. And with money, basically they have the power to build their product. They have the power to make marketing and to make us believe that it's better to use their product.
Could you get to a concrete?
Yeah. So my question is, could it be reasonable to think that free software will only win if we can make a weapon against them, meaning we build an economical model for free software, basically, decentralized.
Well, there are many economic models for free software, but the problem with society today is that it has surrendered too much to the idea that businesses are entitled to do whatever they find profitable. The European Union is starting to turn against that, and I'm glad to say. It's got some good ideas and some very bad ideas, but at least the European Union is willing to tell businesses, no, you can't do that. I don't care how much profit you make from it. You can't do that. That is a very important method to use. And politically, that's what part of what we should be doing. But simply saying no is part of what we should be doing. There are a lot of things that businesses want to do with us that would spy on us or manipulate us and so on, that we can simply say no to. I've never used any of the well-known anti-social media platforms. I've never been used by them either. At the moment, the things I post on my personal website, stallman.org, are getting reposted automatically on Mastodon. Now, Mastodon is not, I wouldn't call Mastodon an anti-social media platform. It's not designed in the nasty ways that those are. But in any case, so I am using it to some extent. But I think that's fairly different. So most people say they can't imagine stopping. They become addicted. Yet I never started. And it is possible to stop. And people report that the effects of addiction to those anti-social media platforms are debilitating and painful. So it really is a good idea to stop.
Thank you for the talk. I have also a question for you about the philosophical foundations behind the axioms of like the four essential axioms of free software.
You mean the 4 essential freedoms?
Yeah, 4 essential freedoms. I would like to know if you also offer some philosophical foundations behind them, if you ever question them, and maybe how do they refer to your concept of free society?
Oh.
Thank you.
Well, first of all, they didn't come from abstract philosophy. They came from my experience in the free software community from before I started developing GNU. So I knew what our way of life was. I knew I knew what we did. And so I could see the at that time, 3 essential freedoms, the freedoms 1, 2, and 3, which are the freedom to study and change the program, the freedom to redistribute, and the freedom to publish your modified versions. In the 1980s, based on my knowledge of copyright law at the time, I thought the freedom to run the program was an automatic consequence of the other 3. So it didn't need to be stated. Of course, it would have been absurd to say that a program was free if you could do everything with it except run it. But I thought that that was automatic. In the 90s, I learned that that was not so, and therefore the freedom to run had to be explicitly stated. That belonged at the beginning of the list, and I didn't want to renumber the freedoms that were already in the list, so I added it as freedom 0. So initially it was freedoms 1, 2, and 3. The cute idea of starting at 0, it's nice, but actually that wasn't what I originally planned. So all of these freedoms are visibly necessary. They didn't come from abstract thinking. They didn't come from an abstract philosophy of freedom. They came from living in the free software community. And yeah, of course, I've questioned them at times, but questioning just reinforces my conviction that they are important.
Hello. Appreciate your contribution to the struggle for freedom a lot. My question would be, there's thousands of GNU Linux distros out there by now. If we look on the distros on GNU.org, listed under free software, it's very few. Why do you think that very few distros out of the thousands of GNU Linux distros follow the guidelines to be under free software?
Well, first of all, you're asking me to speculate about what other people think. So it's not an answer I could give in an authoritative way. But I have some idea. It has to do with the prevalence of open source thinking, which doesn't encourage people to even ask moral questions or think about freedom as a goal. And when you just see how widespread that way of thinking is in our community, it's not surprising that lots of people say, hey, let's make our own distro. Wouldn't it be fun if people used our distro? This is not an important job for the community. It's not something we need. But people enjoy doing it. And if freedom wasn't their goal in the first place, then it's no surprise that they don't make it their goal at this point. We can help change that by focusing on free, svobodny software and not getting distracted with things like open source and applying bringing our criteria of freedom into our judgments in practice when we do things. I don't have a portable phone. I never have. Once I found out what they did, that the phone network would track your movements and that they could be remotely converted into listening devices because there's a universal backdoor, I said, I don't want that thing. Keep it away. So if a system depends on people to have portable phones, I'm going to notice. I'm going to tell people, hey, there's a problem here. You're assuming that everybody's going to have this. What are you going to do about people like me who don't have it? You have a website. Oh, you designed your website so I'd have to run non-free software to use it. Well, my browser is IceCat. It's a modified version of Firefox, obviously. And it has Libre.js, so it will block non-free JavaScript programs. And that way, I'll say, hey, there's a problem with your website. If more of us did that, it would be harder for people to design a website that required non-free JavaScript and think that they did a good job. We need to make sure that anytime any government agency or important business designs a website that requires non-free software, that it finds out through complaints that that's not okay. We need to make sure that if a business won't take cash, that it finds out soon that there are a bunch of people who complain and say, what's wrong with you? You should let us do business anonymously with cash.
Hi, I have one question. You mentioned that the European Union is making some good steps, some not so good. Could you tell us more?
Well, one good step is attacking the monopolization of large internet platforms and threatening giant fines if they abuse their monopolistic power through anti-competitive things. One example of a bad proposal is the chat control directive, where basically everybody would be snooped on. It's in the name of protecting children. Well, that is a desirable thing to do, but not by adopting a totalitarian society that denies everyone all privacy. There are other things even more important, and they have to be respected. So this is the kind of thing that people should get involved in the fight against now. And I believe one of the Czech Euro MEPs is a leader in this fight. There's another dangerous step, although whether it will be bad ultimately or not, I don't know. There's a cyber resilience directive being proposed whose purpose is just to make sure that when programs are developed and then used, that the records are kept about who contributed which parts to them. And in principle, that's a good thing to do. Most free software development projects do this kind of thing more or less. Depending on how that comes out, it might be okay and helpfully codifying good practice, or it might make use of many free programs basically impossible. And who knows?
Okay, thanks for being here. I would like to ask that with the rise of artificial intelligence and the ability to run those models locally, do you have any experience with them? And if so, are you happy?
Right. What are you talking about? When you say artificial intelligence, could you be more specific?
Okay.
What things you were talking about?
I would specify as large language models.
Ah.
Okay.
Now I know what you're talking about.
Are you happy of the movement for free, sometimes, unfortunately, only open source models.
Okay, let me respond. Don't give me a long list of questions, but you can follow up. That's better. If you give me a long list of questions, I won't remember them all. But if I can answer them one by one, I can answer several questions. First of all, there is a widespread misunderstanding of the difference between free software and open source. Nearly all open source programs are free software, and nearly all free programs are open source. The main difference between them, between free and open source, is not in regard to which programs qualify, it's in regard to how you think about the concepts. When you think about free software, it's defined in terms of freedoms that are respected. When you the definition of open source isn't written that way, and it isn't conceptualized that way. Now, there are some counterexamples. For instance, there are many, if you look at all the open source programs, almost all of them are free software, but some are not, and the reason is that the executable is non-free. This is a weird thing. It is possible for the source code of a program to be free, but the executable that is released not to be free. How can this happen? Well, if the executable is meant to run in a particular specialized piece of hardware, and if that hardware checks for a signature, then it could be that it will run the official executable, and you get the source code for it, but if you change the source code and you compile that, you won't be able to run your executable, the executable of your modified source, in that piece of hardware. This is known as TiVoization, and it's often used with executables whose job is to restrict the user. This is one of the kinds of malicious functionalities that you're likely to find in non-free software. So this is a weird case of non-free software. There's an executable that has malicious functionalities, and they use GPL-covered software in it, so they had to release the source. So they make the hardware reject any modified executable. Now, they can do this under GPL version 2. GPL version 3 says they can't. So they don't use GPL software under GPL version 3. But they might use Linux, the kernel, which is under GPL version 2. They can get away with this. So this is one of the cases where there are programs that are open source but not free. So the Linux, because it's under GPL version 2, well, the source is free. And normally the executables are free too, but in that weird case, the executables can be non-free because you can't run the executable of a modified source. But it qualifies as open source because the definition of open source is not phrased in terms of freedoms for the user. It's just phrased in terms of what the source code permits. So it's simply blind to this problem. This is the kind, basically open source and free software, they mostly overlap. And then there are places where they don't for special reasons. So anyway, I bring this up because a lot of people think that, well, there are the open source programs and there are the free programs and they're almost disjoint collections and the free programs are better. No, the simple approximation is they're the same programs. But there are special cases where a program is free and not open source, or open source and not free. These are the unusual cases. Anyway, I had to refer to that because it was in the question. But getting back to the question you asked about, what can we say about large language models and freedom? First of all, I do not call them artificial intelligence. And the reason is, to be intelligent, it has to know something or understand something. And they don't. I call them bullshit generators. They make smooth text. They're very smooth at pretending to know something. They're perfect for fascist disinformation. So basically, I wouldn't allow people to pass off output of those things as if it were supposed to tell you anything. That would make them less harmful. But then, if they exist, of course, they should be free software to release this, and mostly they're not. In some cases, the language model is released, but it's under a very restrictive license that says you can't do all sorts of things with it. Well, that's not respecting users' freedom. Or they're not released at all. They're only service as a software substitute. You can't get a copy to run. All you can do is log in on somebody's server and submit your request and get an answer. Well, that's not a legitimate way to release any program. Well, when they put those restrictions on running these models, they're addressing real or perceived problems that may be very important. For instance, deepfakes. Deepfakes are a very dangerous form of lying to people and maybe deserve attention from society. Maybe it should be a crime to send or release a deepfake of anyone without that someone's explicit permission. But that shouldn't be decided by what someone puts in a software license. That should be decided democratically through legislation. If you let any software development organization write its own regulations and laws about what people are allowed to do with software, it gives that organization unjust and dangerous power. And even if some organization uses that power wisely, well, that's not where the power should be. And then, if that's how it's regulated, what it could do is too weak. Suppose that our society's defense against deepfakes worked through license agreements, getting an account on a server where you were going to use some sort of generative system, and one of the license conditions was you won't make a deepfake. Well, how would they investigate who had made a deepfake? You see what I mean? They wouldn't be able to prosecute people for making deepfakes. All they'd be able to do maybe is cut off someone's account, and that someone might find another account to use. If deepfakes turn out to be really dangerous, we probably need to do more than that. We probably need to prosecute those people and maybe put them in jail. Maybe then they'd be scared to do it. So when there are real problems in society caused by using some sort of software equipment in a very bad way, the solution for that is not a license that limits what people are allowed to do. It's through laws that can be decided democratically and thus have a chance of being morally authoritative. When a company just decrees you're not allowed to do this, that's never morally authoritative. So my conclusion is the moral and immoral ways of licensing software are the same for large language models as they are for everything else. It should be free. but that doesn't mean you can use them to do absolutely anything. You can use a text editor or an email system to commit fraud. People can do that. They have. And it's a crime. And in fact, the crime of fraud isn't defined in terms of whether you're using a text editor, whether you're using email or any other software facility. It's defined at a higher level than that, which is just right. So that was a rather long answer, but is there a follow-up to that from? Because I promised I would answer follow-up questions to that as an excuse for saying, let me start with the first.
No follow-ups. Go ahead, Bob.
So just a quite different question. With more broad availability of RISC-V hardware recently, which is not proprietary or patent encumbered in the same way as Intel or ARM chipsets, do you feel that there is a moral imperative for us to use that hardware?
I don't know yet. I haven't learned about the recent progress. I'd like to know about it. What I wonder is there a laptop with a RISC-V processor in it? Do they make and sell those?
I think they're just about starting to appear. It's primarily single board computers, but I think it's very close.
Well, then when there's a laptop, I may want one. I'd like to find out. I have no use for single board computers myself. I use a laptop to do my work. And part of the reason is I'm not a hardware hacker. I've never done anything like that. I've actually been disappointed that the work on RISC-V wasn't aiming towards making a laptop. Because I would love that. Basically, once, I would say this is the kind of thing that changes gradually. And by the way, I think that the term free hardware is conceptually incoherent. It's trying to get at a distinction that could make sense, but in order for it to be clear and well thought out, you've got to look at it differently. It's not the hardware itself that can be free. What can be free or non-free is the hardware design. And this makes a difference because in one piece of hardware, there are typically going to be many different designs at different levels. For instance, if it's digital electronic hardware, there's probably a circuit board which has a design, and then there are chips which have designs inside them. Well, these are different designs, but the hardware is made from all of them, although the different parts are made by different companies probably at different times. So in order to have a general enough framework to cope with that situation, you've got to separate the designs and ask, is this design free? Is that design free? Is the design in that chip free? And then you can get answers. But the answers you get will not be a simple yes or no. So how do you judge morally what you should do? Maybe someday we'll get to a point where chips and circuits made from free designs are so common that we could adopt a simple rule. I don't want anything with any circuit made from a non-free design. I can't trust that. And that will be a great day if we reach that point. But along the way, I think we'll need to be more flexible about it. And so far, we are nowhere near the day we could feasibly reject hardware made from non-free designs.
Okay, I would like to ask whether there is some hint from you of some recommendation how to free government agencies from the stranglehold of proprietary software, because the government then forces using the non-free proprietary software on the citizens.
I think that the only way I can see is a political movement of people who together demand that the agency accommodate their insistence on not running that software. And in the meantime, dealing with the agency through paper or whatever it is. Now, there is, however, a case, a peculiar case of France. French ministries, from what I hear from a friend who works for one, are using free software more and more internally. They use GNU plus Linux. They edit documents with LibreOffice. They see the benefits of free software. Where these benefits do not show up is in interfaces for citizens to talk with. That is quite unfortunate, but I think a movement has a chance. Meanwhile, other European countries have a chance to try to learn from France about using free software internally.
Hello, I've read several free software licenses, and I had a question because sometimes they are hard to understand.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that.
Sometimes when I read free software licenses, I find them hard to understand. What do you think about the importance of them being understandable?
The most important thing, the highest priority, has to be that legally they mean what they need to mean. That takes absolute priority. Now, we have lots of programs that are not easy to read. They're complicated, some of them. And some of it, in some sense, for some purposes, if those programs were simpler, that would be better. But that's not more important than having them do the right thing. So, we can find ways to simplify them, make them more readable, but we can't. We can't make that the priority. It's the same with the licenses. They're primarily legal documents. And I regret to say that it is impossible to have all the reasonable, sensible desiderata in those licenses just as it is in those programs.
Are licenses like MIT a help or a hindrance to?
Well, it's a mistake to talk of licenses like MIT. There are two different MIT licenses. They're similar, but they're not the same. Anyway, they are sort of simple as licenses go, but they do the wrong thing. They're not copyleft licenses. I will take a copyleft license over a simple license any day. Because the important thing is what job it does.
Is there a...
So is it possible to have free software without the copyleft?
Of course, there are, I've just mentioned the two different variants of, it's the X11 license and the expat license. Those are non-copyleft free licenses. Then there are a couple of different variants of BSD license, which are non-copyleft licenses. There is the Apache 2.0 license, which is non-copyleft. But it's better than those others because it has a patent resistance clause in it. If you want to find out about these, look through the page licenselist.html. It's sure there are non-copyleft free licenses. In fact, until 1985, there were no copyleft licenses. That's when I invented it. But there's a good reason to use copyleft. I didn't want to have to compete with proprietary versions of my own software as I tried to make free software better. And copyleft is what saves you from having to do that.
Yes?
So, I've got two questions. The first one is like the free software community and like the Linux, GNU Linux community keeps talking about like the year of Linux desktop. Like when everyone starts using GNU Linux. And I want to ask you if you think that's possible. And
I'm sorry, stop. Please stop.
The impulse for
Please stop. Let me try to. First of all, I'm not sure which people you're talking about. You're saying that some people say everyone's going to be using GNU/Linux as a desktop? Well, I'm not making a prediction like that. I don't know. So you may be hearing some people say this. I'm not sure who they are, and I don't want to make that claim. I'd sure love to see Windows disappear and macOS disappear, but I'm not going to predict that's going to happen. And my main efforts to try to convince people are not technical. I'd like to see people recognize how evil those systems are. I'd rather see people express disgust at how bad it is to be treated that way by non-free software and get rid of it. But we were getting to another question.
My other question is what would you recommend to students whose school forces them to use non-free software?
I couldn't hear all of that. What would I recommend to?
For a student who is forced to use non-free software?
Well, what I'd recommend is look for ways to refuse. In GNU.org/education, you can find an article by a Polish student about how he refused to use non-free software for his school. He was very clever and persistent, and he succeeded almost all the time. So people are too quick to assume it's hopeless.
Thank you. I have one question here. About digital payments and online banking, which became necessary for use to use for many services in one's life. However, they require and are all based on non-free software, whether it's banks, payment, or card providers.
I've never used them. Yeah. I can't use online banking because it's non-free software, and I never run non-free software. So apparently it's not as necessary as all that. I may have to go to the bank branch to do some things.
So the question is about online services, paying for not just paying, but all of this banking, which is based on non-free software and could be re-implemented other ways. There is the GNU Teller, which tries this, and there is a big ecosystem of cryptocurrencies, which are...
I can't hear what you're saying. You're speaking too fast.
I'm sorry.
I can't hear the words.
I'm sorry.
But it sounds like someone wants to know more about GNU Teller.
So one attempt to solve this is GNU Teller. How would you compare this to the use of cryptocurrencies, which are also...
Stop. Yeah. Don't ask me to say so much, piling it up. I can't respond to that all at once. It's too big. I can tell you about GNU Teller. GNU Teller is a payment system that we are developing It's not a currency. So Thaler payments are denominated in some currency that exists previously. And the idea is that you get your Thaler tokens from some central organization, although there might be more than one. And then you make the payments, and in paying, you're anonymous. The payer is anonymous through blind signatures. But the payee is always identified. In order for the payee to turn in the payment and get money from that, the payee has to identify itself. So if you use Thaler to pay a store for something, neither the store nor any other entity can determine you are the one who paid. But the store's income has to be reported. This is a design feature. It is to prevent the store from evading taxes or hiding wealth, both of which are enormous global problems that impoverish most people. If you want to find out more technical details of GNU Thaler, look at Thaler.net. It's spelled TALER.net. I say that systems that permit Thaler payments are tolerable, and the others are intolerable. Now, I buy things with cash. That's what I do. I don't use online payment, partly because I am unwilling to be identified. I don't want there to be a record of what things I bought. So as long as online payments are not anonymous for me, I don't do them, period. I hope someday I'll be able to make anonymous online payments with Thaler. But for right now, I use these. I'm really stubborn against things I think are oppressive. I'm willing to go to trouble to do things the way that doesn't mistreat me. And I hope others will join me until we can succeed in overcoming those unjust systems.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
So one of the ways that you were saying that we can push free software is basically through government, right? To push government to adopt some laws, etc.
Yeah.
For free software. But the government, most of the government are not democratical. I mean, there is maybe
now what?
Democratical. There is maybe only Switzerland, for example, in Europe, where there is a true democracy.
I think that's extreme. They're not as democratic as they ought to be, it's true. And yes, Switzerland is more democratic. That doesn't necessarily mean I always like the decisions that the Swiss make, but at least they've got, in overall, a better system. And yeah, it's not easy. I'm not trying to say that this is easy. And in general, our social and economic and legal system is often unjust.
Yeah, but for example, I'm French, and French people, they protest a lot about a lot of stuff that are for them more important than free software.
I'm afraid I couldn't hear you. What?
Yeah, for French people, for example, they protest a lot because they want to have fundamental rights, and they are every time ignored, and there is no way for them to push the government.
What do you want from me?
Yeah, like you were saying, that could be a solution, and for me, it is not, because we are not in a democracy.
I'm not saying that you can win. These are just ideas. I'm not a god. You can't come to me and expect me to tell you. I'm not an oracle either.
No, but I was like telling you that maybe we have to make an economical model around open source, and then you were telling me. No, but it doesn't.
I'm not interested in open source because if you stop thinking about freedom, you will not be teaching anybody else to respect your freedom. Well, I'm afraid I don't follow you, but to me, the meaning of, quote, open source, unquote, is one thing, and the meaning of, quote, free software, unquote, is another thing. And these meanings exist in people's minds, in what people have published and said, and in society. And it's not up to me or you or any other individual to say, from now on, I decide that open source really means that. I mean, you can wish it did, but if other people don't think so, then you could be fooling yourself. So given what the terms free software and open source have come to mean and what they were established to mean, which one you say affects what meaning you express. That's a fact, and based on that fact, I decide what I'm going to say. And you can decide what you're going to say. Now, I'm not sure what an economy for either open source or free software would actually mean. I mean, free software is part of the economy now in various complicated ways, which to a large extent I'm happy with, although not totally. And okay, I'm not opposed to free software being made for somebody's profit. I'm not against business or profit in general. So by all means, do that.
What do you think about patents and proprietary standards in
Sorry, what?
So where is that question coming from? Yeah, that was the last question. So we'll do one question if you can do it in 12 words with no contextual explanation.
What do you think about patents and proprietary standards in software industry?
Okay, so these are two questions. First of all, I think the world would be better off if patent law were abolished. However, there are three fields in which patents are especially harmful. One of them is medicine. Patented medicines kill. They kill people who can't afford the price of the medicines as increased by patents. The pharma company system justifies these patents and the enormous prices it can charge by claiming that the companies have to pay for expensive things like studies of the effects of these medicines. Well, those studies have to be done, and they have to be expensive, and the state should pay for them. It is established that when pharma companies pay for the testing of the effects of drugs that they make, those studies are less likely to find any adverse effects. In other words, the studies are corrupted by the fact that the manufacturers pay for them. And these companies have been caught doing various kinds of sleazy ways of corrupting science, like fake medical journals that exist only to publish ghost-written papers that are really just marketing for the companies. We should remove a lot of the pharma companies' control over the testing and development of drugs. Anyway, and then we should subsidize what needs to be subsidized and use money from taxing rich people and companies to pay for that. Anyway, another area where patents are particularly harmful is in farming. Farmers have had the right for, as long as there's been farming, to save and share the things that they cultivate, and that right must be maintained. So patents must not get in the way. And the third field in which patents do particular harm is software. The reason is that software packages are large and they combine thousands of ideas. And if 10% of those ideas are patented, well, then designing software becomes potentially a matter of gridlock. You can't get from here to there when you have to go through lots of patents or lots of ideas, each of which might be patented, to get across. I've posted an article about this, software and literary patents. It's in GNU.org/philosophy. It uses the idea of patents on literary elements in a novel to show how harmful it would be to allow patents to do to fiction writing what they can do to software. Now, proprietary standards, well, first of all, it's a mistake to talk, when you're talking about freedom to use interfaces, it's a mistake to focus on standards, because compatibility with existing systems can require implementing the existing interfaces. Now, some of those interfaces happen to be published standards, and others are not. But that's just that distinction is not crucial. Whether this interface you need to implement is officially a standard or not doesn't make that much difference. So I say we should talk about the need for interfaces to be free. We shouldn't be focusing on standards when we raise this issue. And yeah, of course, they should never be restricted. So it may be time for me to go. I think it is.
Stallman, it is, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us.
Oh, it's time for the auction. I forgot.
Okay, we have an auction. We'll do the auction.
So first I will auction this. Oh, I need less light on stage and more on the audience because I need to see you. Basically, if you bid, I need you to wave your arm and shout the amount you're bidding as loud as you can.
In cash, right?
Yes. And I guess it's best if I do it in euros. If what you have is Czech currency, that's okay too, but it's equivalent to a certain amount of euros. And that is what I can keep track of. So this is one of the few remaining baby GNUs, and I'm going to auction it for the benefit of the Free Software Foundation. And if you buy it, I can sign this card, and it's adorable, and it needs a home. So I'm going to ask for 100 euros to start. I've got 100. Do I get 110? How much? I've got 110. Do I get 120? I've got 120. Do I get 130? I've got 130. Do I get 140? I've got 140. Do I get 150? 150. Do I get 160? 160 or more. Do I get 160 or more for this? I've got 160. Do I get 170 or more? Do I get 170 or more for this adorable? How much? 200. I've got 200. Do I get 220? Do I get 220 for this adorable GNU? 220 or more? to the Free Software Foundation to defend freedom? I've got 220. I've got 220. Do I get 240? I couldn't hear that. Do I get 240 or more for this adorable GNU? I've got, who bid? That's you? Okay, I've got 240. Do I get 260? 260. I've got 260. Do I get 280? Do I get 280 for this adorable GNU? Well, there's no reason to immediately overbid yourself. I've got 260. Do I get 280 for this adorable GNU? I've got 280. Do I get 300 for this adorable GNU? Do I get 300? 300 for this adorable GNU.
Did we mention that the GNU is adorable?
So are you bidding? Yep. How much? 300. I've got 300. Do I get 330 for this adorable GNU?
For free software.
Do I get 330 to the Free Software Foundation to defend freedom? 330 or more?
It's a great number. We're not even close to 420 yet, you guys. What is up?
Do I get 330 or more? Last chance to bid 330 or more for this adorable GNU. Last chance.
It's cash.
It has to be cash to us, unfortunately, because, well, actually, the FSF can take credit cards. So I guess I could do that.
All right, so now that you guys got your plastic and you know that dirty fiat that you don't like, we can start getting up to symbolic numbers here, like 420, like 690.
I got to find out if someone's bidding 330 or more for this adorable GNU.
Did we mention that it's adorable?
I've got 330. Do I get 360 or more for this adorable GNU?
Sounds like a round figure to me.
Do I get 360 or more? Last chance to bid 360 or more. Last chance. How much? How much did you bid? I've got 360. Okay, do I get 400 for this adorable GNU?
Looks like the adults have gotten the room.
400 or more for this adorable GNU. 400 or more to the free. How much? 400. I've got 400. Do I get 450? What? 450. Sorry, I don't want to go up by small amounts. That would take too long. We all got other stuff to do, and I've got someplace to go. So do I get 450 or more? I've got 450. Do I get 500? Do I get 500? Is there another bid?
You know, you guys could pool.
I've got 400. Do I get, wait, how much did you bid? I got 450. So do I get 500? I'm too sleepy for this. What can I do? Do I get 500 for this adorable GNU? Last chance to bid 500 or more for this adorable GNU? I think so.
Is it
There's no door in it, but it's adorable. Last chance to bid 500 or more. Going. I've got 500. Do I get 550 or more for this adorable GNU? 550
it's
or more?
It's definitely a GNU. It's really a one.
550 or more? What? I've got 550. Do I get 600? Do I get 600 for this adorable GNU? 600 or more to the Free Software Foundation? I've got 600.
Yeah.
Do I get 650? 650 or more for this adorable GNU? 650. Last chance to bid 650 or more. I've got 600. Do I get 650?
You know, this is recorded. This will be on YouTube.
Going. Gone for 600.
Yeah.
Please come up. Come up and pay. Basically, what you've got to do is write down your credit card data on a piece of paper and show that and the card to me, and then I'll be able to take the card payment back to the FSF.
So is this a safe way? Someone asks me to write down my credit card number.
Yep, that's what you basically do. If we had a machine here to swipe the card, it would copy that data on a piece of paper.
Well, okay. I think if I can trust anyone, I can trust Richard Stallman.
So I suggest you start writing now, because I got to get going fast, and I've got one more thing to auction. This is an adorable book that needs a home. So I'm going to auction it for the benefit of the Free Software Foundation. It's Free Software, Free Society, 3rd edition. I'm going to start with 50 euros minimum bid for this book, because we can print more of them. We can't make more of these. Anyway, so do I get 50 euros for this adorable book? Please don't get in the way. Do I get 50 euros for this? How much? I got 50. Do I get 60? I got 60. Do I get 70? I've got 60. Do I get 70 for this adorable book? I've got 70. Do I get 80? I've got 80. Do I get 90? I've got 100. Do I get 110? 110 for this adorable book? I've got 100. Do I get 110? I've got 110. Do I get 120? 120 for this adorable book, which also can be used as a fan. I've got 110. Do I get 120? I've got 120. Do I get 130 for this? I've got 130. Do I get 140? I've got 130. Do I get 140 for this adorable book? I've got 140. Do I get 150? I've got 150. Do I get 160? I've got 150. Do I get 160 for this adorable book? Do I get 160? I've got 160. Do I get 170? Do I get 170 for this adorable book? I've got 160. Do I get 170? Last chance to bid one. I've got 170. Do I get 180? What? I've got 180. Do I get 200? I've got 180. Do I get 200 for this adorable book? How much? I've got 200. Do I get 220? 220 for this adorable book? Last chance to bid 220 or more for this adorable book.
Come on, you guys. We got a guy who wants to get his GNU.
I've got 200. Do I get 220? Going. Gone for 200. Please come up and pay.